I don't have a good idea of exactly when we started the whole idea, started the concept of building an airplane together, but we had talked about it, casually for a while, and of course we had worked together on things, building our house. I had helped my dad build the upstairs, the bedrooms up there, and various things like that. But I think it was somewhere around 2000.
Yeah, I wanted to build the airplane because I wanted to build an airplane.
I believe he ordered the kit somewhere around 2001, and it was delivered some months later.
Well, the kit was in a big box, everything in a big box. So I unpacked the box and took stuff out, set it aside, and sorted things out. And the kit was just about perfect. There were some things that were done for you, but not much. And then the rest of the stuff, you had to figure it out for yourself from the drawings.
It is a daunting prospect when you first get it. First you get that delivery pile of metal, and then you unroll your plans, which are big sheets of paper, and it's this thick, different pages of all the different components, and it's very daunting. And that's what everybody says when they launch this type of project, a home-built project, is you can't look at the entirety of it and say, I can't do this, it's too much.
And then I saw not how easy it was, but how doable it was. And I figured, I can do that. I'm an aeronautical engineer for one thing, and it's all just mechanics of doing things. If you can rivet and cut and shape, you're in business.
You start with one little step, and that's what you do. You open up page one, and you start with the instructions. Take this piece of metal, cut it to this length. That's step one. And then you go to step two. And you have to have the ability to have that long-term view where you know where this is going. You have to be able to stick with that project. And of course, they always take years. I believe the average home built is about 10 years. Ours was a little bit longer.
I set up my shop so I could build there. I just cleared everything out. It became the Sonex assembly shop. Yeah, well, this was an existing shop, and I decided this would be a good place to build it. It was long enough and wide enough so I could build semi-span, which is half the width of the wing. And the trailing edge was the right size, so it fit very nicely in here. Plus I had room to put in my machines. So it became what amounted to a regular job, where normally, because I was retired by that, normally I would go to work in the morning, I work till lunchtime, and then have lunch, and then come back to work and work till maybe 4 in the afternoon. And I just continued that routine, only I was building an airplane. So, and I enjoyed it. It was really fun. And also I could keep my own hours. If I had something else I'd wanted to do, I'd do it. I didn't have to. It wasn't like having a regular job where you have to do. But it worked out very well.
I actually didn't start working on my part of it for at least a year, possibly a year and a half. It was all shipped to his house in an enormous crate. He had to separate all the things. My end of the project was going to be the fuselage. His was going to be the wings and the tail feathers.
The kit was an excellent kit, as a matter of fact. And things were logical, and they went together well. And the instructions that came with it were very good. I followed those. So it was a good kit, and I was very pleased with it.
So we separated out my stuff when I did finally get out there. I rented a van, loaded it up in that van, all these, and they're just basically big pieces of metal, mostly aluminum. Stock L-shaped aluminum, bar aluminum, sheet aluminum for the skins. And we separated it all out, and the nuts and bolts that went with them, my stuff and his stuff. And I loaded up in my van and drove him out to Minnesota. He was already well underway building the wings at that time. He had some jigs and some structures and things, so he got a head start on it all. But then I dove right in, starting the building of the fuselage.
You build little parts, which become big parts, which get attached to other parts, and eventually, you get an airframe. When you look at it, you think, good God, I have to do all that? But if you do it in bite-sized chunks, day by day, it's not that. And if you enjoy doing it, it's not bad at all.
The chronology is pretty lengthy, actually. It took us quite a few years to do it. In order to continue with the project, we had to make these two things together. We had to put the wings together, and we had to get the canopy on, get the engine on it. So I then rented a van, a larger truck, because it was a bigger piece of structure now, loaded up there, drove it to New York. So that was its second cross-country trip. There, primarily it became my dad working on it for the next few years, but I would fly out to help him fairly often. We rigged the wings. We fitted the wings together. We mounted the engine together, got the canopy on it together, bigger items like that. I helped get the landing gear on it. He had built the tail, the horizontal and vertical stabilizers, and he mounted those on. I wasn't there for that one. But slowly the thing changed from just the wings and the separate fuselage into an actual airplane. So the project was getting too big for my father's garage. We had to take the pieces and actually make them into a flying, functioning airplane. And that, of course, it was logical to do that in Minnesota because I would be flying it and I would be flying it out here. We could have tried to do it in Islip or something like that, but this was just a more sensible way to do it. So I flew out there and rented a very large moving truck and got the assistance of my brother, Dwayne, and my brother-in-law, Billy, and my dad, and I think we might have had somebody else there too as well. Again, the wings are detachable, so we could put them on the side of the moving truck, but we had to get this big beast, which now at this point had an engine on it, and it had the tail, the vertical and horizontal stabilizers mounted on it. It was a pretty large structure. And my dad had given me measurements for how wide it was, so I rented the truck based on that. Well, when we actually got the thing up the ramp, the the horizontal stabilizer was just a tad too wide, and we couldn't get the thing on there. And we thought, and it was quite heavy at the time. We were struggling to get it up the ramp. Our options were to tilt it, to get it into the van, because once it was past the door, it'd fit in there, or something else. And I came up with this something else. I went into my dad's house and I grabbed his Sawzall. And I came back out with a blade and he said, "What are you doing?" And I said, "I'm gonna cut off one of the fiberglass wingtips on horizontal stabilizer." And he said, "Are you nuts?" And I said, "It's the only way to do this." I knew I could just repair it again. So I chopped off about that much of it and then it fit. And got it in the truck and drove it 23 hours out to Minnesota. Spent the night in a truck stop near Valparaiso, Indiana. But then unloaded it, and by that time, again, because it was so large, it didn't fit in my garage either. So I became a partial renter of a hangar here at Flying Cloud. I shared a space with my brother-in-law, Tom O'Reilly, who had an airplane down here. So I got a little nook in there, and that became the new building area where I then completed the airplane over the next few years. When we first got the Sonex and started building it, we were going to have it done in 2 to 3 years. This is what we told ourselves. Because the plan was, my dad, who had taken some flying lessons, was now going to get, there was a new class of license the FAA had come up with. It was called Sport Pilot. And it was appropriate for smaller airplanes like this, which was a new class of aircraft called light sport. That's what it is, light sport aircraft. It's below a certain weight, below a certain speed. You can only fly during the day. So he was going to get his license. So in view of that, he had learned to fly with an older style instrument panel with round dials for all of the indicators, airspeed indicator, oil pressure, altitude, all that sort of stuff, just the basic round dials. So he took on the job of designing the instrument panel, which on our airplane is teeny. It's 40 inches wide, it's about that tall, doesn't fit a lot on there. It proved to be a frustration for him. He had full-size cutouts of all the instruments he wanted to get on there, and they just didn't fit.
Okay, I wanted the traditional round dials. I had even gotten a few of them, and I had laid out the panel, just marked it up, where everything would be, where it'd go. And Gray didn't like that. He wanted the latest in electronics.
So he said, I'm giving up on this thing, and he gave it to me. And I said, great, thanks, Dad, because I had other ideas.
So he got what he wanted.
Getting the magazine from the EAA and, just going to Oshkosh and seeing what other people are building, I knew that there was much more available. Really, really cool avionics from upstarts, these new little companies that were producing instruments that were glass instruments, like the big jets had, but they were combined instruments. They would have all your engine information, your flight information on one little instrument there. And then, of course, there's satellite navigation coming into the industry. And, the old style Cessna and Piper airplanes, they had no provision for that stuff. They were new boxes, but they had to be FAA certified. So that was moving at a snail's pace in the old certified airplanes. The home builders were putting GPS in all their airplanes. They were putting in glass. So I settled on a design that had, instead of 24 round dials, had 4 instruments. And they perform all the same functions and do it better.
And it was a tight fit. The panel's only about that big, and you got to put all these things in there. So that's what happened.
And we talked about several different paint jobs, and my dad had fun designing some. He had a few schematic models. He had an American Airlines themed paint job, and I said, well, that's fine. At the time, we had 3 family members working for American Airlines, me, Cindy, and Kevin at Business Express / American Eagle. And he also had a Notre Dame themed paint job, and I like that one too. We're both Notre Dame aero engineering graduates. We have that tie. That would have been fun also, but I overrode him on that decision because I had the airplane at that point. I overrode him and chose a theme of an F-105 that he had been a flight test engineer on. They had 2 test airplanes and 2 teams of engineers and technicians, and my dad was on one of those teams. And each team got to design their own paint scheme, and my dad, being somewhat artistic, designed the paint scheme for theirs. It's reminiscent of the Thunderbirds paint scheme, slightly. And we had photos of that. I had photos of that and thought I could work that into the design of the Sonex. Of course, it's not an F-105, but with a little bit of creativity, I came up with a paint scheme that worked. And so that's what I used. It was largely shiny metal, which I really love. Polished aluminum airplanes just are a thrill to see when they're done right. They're just beautiful. And with mostly red, but also white and black accents on it. And I figured I could learn how to do that. And that was a learning process too, but I did with help from other people and got the airplane painted with that. And I think it turned out pretty well. Not completely professional. There are a lot of drips and flaws, but it turned out, and it's honoring my dad's heritage, so that's fun. When I had that all done, I had it pre-inspected by the EAA folks down there. I had my paperwork apparently all lined up. It has to be submitted to the FAA itself afterwards. I called the inspector who pretty much does the entire Minnesota area, and he came and looked at my airplane. That was July 23rd of 2013, and he gave it the thumbs up. So he issued me basically a temporary airworthiness certificate, which says that I'm allowed to fly my airplane with just me alone, no passengers, for a period of 40 hours before I'm allowed to take anybody else in it. I had a designated area. I could only fly from my home airport here at Flying Cloud directly west until I was well clear of populated areas, basically way out over the farms. That was my practice area. It was designated, and I was not allowed to leave that practice area. It's very strictly controlled. Of course, after the inspection, the thing that has to happen first is the first flight, and then I am then authorized again, blessed by the FAA, to take this thing flying. It was quite a memorable day, I have to say that. It's an established airplane. Quite a few people had built one before, several hundred of them. So you knew it's going to fly right, but you know, you built it yourself, and my dad and I built it, and so you're never quite 100% sure if it's all going to work out right. You know, if the engine runs on the ground, is it going to run well in the air for you? Did you do the fuel system well enough that it's going to actually continue to give it fuel once you get airborne? Lots of questions to it. So the first flight is very carefully planned. You think about it extensively. It's not going to be very long. It's very basic. You don't do anything fancy. Take it up. So I took off. I went flying, which was very exciting. It did get airborne. I had talked to the tower here, the control tower, beforehand, and had set up, again, a typical standard procedure. I went into a higher altitude pattern than normally they have here. It's about 2,500 feet, just so I could check out the systems of the airplane that I had never landed before. I'd taken off once. See how it handles in slower flight in the regime that you would be in for landing the airplane. Does it turn left when you want it to turn left? Does it turn right when you want it to turn right? Basically, this is a test flight, testing to see if everything's working. Are the cylinder head temperatures staying within range? Is your oil pressure good? Are all the systems working? I mean, not very extensive systems compared to the 737, but that's what it's all about. After a few minutes up there, I came in and I did a low approach to the airport, and I told them I'd be doing that. Just get down to about 100 feet, just seeing if I could establish the proper descent rate, the proper glide path, line up for the runway with this machine. That worked well enough, so I did a go around, came back and landed for my first landing, which it was quite a momentous occasion. It was really a thrill.
Flying in the airplane, there was no surprise, but it did handle very nicely.
Well, the flight characteristics of this little plane it could be described as squirrely. I mean, it's a nimble airplane. It's a fun airplane to fly, but you have to fly it all the time. It's very little. It weighs 636 pounds empty without a full load of fuel and with people in it. The 737s that I fly weigh 174,700 pounds full. It's a significant difference. When you have that large mass, it has much more momentum. It goes through bumpy air and it doesn't get moved around very much. The bumps in the air, turbulence, are caused by changes in the angle of attack, changes in the angle of the wind striking the wing, increases or decreases the lift. That's why the airplane goes up and down. Basically, it's kind of like a boat on the ocean. Well, when you have a small airplane that doesn't weigh much, a smaller gust of wind, you know, just a 10-mile puff of wind that means nothing to a 737 going 300 miles an hour, means a lot to an airplane that just weighs several hundred pounds going 120 miles an hour. So it moves around in the sky, and I tell that to people when I take them up as passengers. It's always going somewhere, you know, like this. And consequently, you have to fly it all the time. You can't just take your hands off and trim it up like you could on a larger, stable airplane, basically hands off. You fly it all the time, but that's part of the fun. It's one of the reasons you fly a little airplane. So it's fun to fly. It is. It's a squirrely little machine, though, but that's part of the fun.